sketchyGOichie.
Hey, hello again. It's me, Roger, your host of sketchyGOichie, an artist, and I want to share with you this little fun sort of what I'm calling Shave of Thrones. A little backstory behind this one. Actually, I was at the barber shop, and my buddy Tony and his boss Mark and Alex, we were kicking around some fun ideas, and this one came up. It'd be kind of funny to do sort of a play on, what was going on with Game of Thrones at the time. Jon Snow, and I'm not sure who came up with the idea. I think it was either Tony or Alex, but it'd be kind of fun to have the Night King giving our hero a cut, and so I came up with the idea of putting it together with him sitting on the Iron Throne, and then sort of merging barber tools to replace the swords from all the Aegon's conquering all the lords he conquered, I believe, as the story goes. So instead, it's I guess it's Mark conquering all the rival shops in Fall River, Massachusetts. But so I chose to as you can see in the early stages there, I dug up some reference of barber shears and straight razors, and decided, you know what, I'm going to take these elements, I'm going to render them completely, and then I'm going to duplicate them, as you can see here, and create like a composition out of the duplicated barber shears and straight edge razors. And I thought it made kind of a cool little play on the Iron Throne. And the reality is, it's it was, if I would have had to go in and render this, each individual shear or scissor, and then place it in place. This, I gotta tell you, maybe I'm lazy, I don't know, but it would have been too much. It would have not been as inspired, as if it wasn't easy enough. The fact that I could just take, draw one, duplicate it, and move it around and position it, and then essentially create what I was looking for was perfect. And like I said, if it wasn't easy enough, Procreate on the iPad makes it even easier. Literally to just duplicate the layers, shift them, then move them around. I'm more accustomed to doing it in Photoshop, so there's a bit of a not a learning curve so much as a habitual sort of breaking habits that I formed from years of using Photoshop. But the sort of tactile nature of the interface on the iPad, inherently, it changes how your workflow. But I've grown accustomed to doing a lot of, sort of the assembly work in Procreate, and maybe it's not as, as time, maybe if it's not as effective a use of my time, but I find it's maybe, again, laziness, chalk it up to laziness. Just remaining within the app and doing a lot of this manipulation is not only kind of fun for me because it's really just pushing around pixels, but it's become sort of like a way to just kind of stay in the app and do it all in here instead of toggling back and forth between the iPad and my MacBook Pro. So as you can see here, I decided to throw some color in there. Initially I was just going to do it as a line art piece, and it looked really cluttered and confusing. So I was like, all right, well, let me apply some color and some shading. The brush I'm using on this, I believe, was a flat brush. I believe it's a brush. I believe I downloaded it. Generally I use the brushes in the set, but I downloaded a set of brushes very early stages when I started learning Procreate, and I believe it was one of those sort of custom brushes. And same thing with that background effect. I believe that's just, I think that's a grunge brush, if I'm not mistaken. That I'm, just apply that red in the background to kind of really give it contrast, which you're gonna hear me repeatedly say over and over and over again in my videos. But contrast is key. That's why I added that sort of deeper, that sort of steely blue in the center of the chair, where just beyond, basically where the back of the seat of the chair is, with all the blades, or what normally would be blades and have been replaced with barber shears. And then, again, in the contrast of that red playing against that blue is what gives it that punch, that pop, particularly off of that black background. So I thought that wasn't enough. So I could have stopped there, and I decided, you know what? Here's the thing. Let's do our Jon Snow. I did it as a separate. It was in a separate document. I brought it into, what's cool again in Procreate is I can create a document and just literally duplicate it, or just select, that layer, that sort of that sketchy blue layer, and bring it in to that throne document. And so I started adding our Jon Snow here, sitting on the throne. In this case, I work layered in layers, even with the line art. Obviously the blue, that sort of blue line, sort of rough under sketch, is on its own layer. And then I added a layer on top of the black line art, which I'm sort of using to ink. And my inking tool of choice is the technical pen, which I've altered. And so I thought the layering process would be I would render Jon Snow on his own layer. Then I would render the Long Claw, his sword, there on the left side of the page. And of course the Night King bearing his icy frozen clippers. So you can see here, this is just me kind of putting in the details, making adjustments. How I make adjustments within the same layer is just simply grab, there's a little sort of a tool, a sort of a selection tool on the upper, on that sort of upper menu. I just use that, and I just sort of drag a selection around the area, like the eyes that I had shifted. And once I have it selected, I use, just duplicate it and shift it and move it over, or just simply maneuver it. Just grab a section and maneuver it to make it fit more properly. Or like I just did there, I selected that right side of the Night King's face and duplicated it to make the left side, and then just join those two layers. Because obviously anytime you select and duplicate something, it creates a brand new layer. You get it into position exactly the way you want it, and then you just pinch merge the two of them together, and then the line art for the Night King will all be on its own layer. Also, I want you guys to note that even though the Night King's face is going to get cut off, that left side of his face and that part of his body and even part of his arm, and if you notice down where the cord from the clippers extends, notice that I've rendered beyond where, matter of fact, that's area you're never going to see, because ultimately it's going to be behind the chair. I find it's best, and this is a great little tip for young artists, render past, render completely. If you're rendering a human head and it's going to be obscured by something, render the entire head. What tends to happen if you don't is the side that you choose to render that is visible, can tend to get skewed. It's a natural thing. Everyone does it. It's the reason why a lot of professional artists will do that. They will render the entire thing, even though you're never, ever, ever going to see that part of his face or that part of his body or even the cord that hangs behind him. You're never going to see it, but I think it keeps a nice flow if you do choose to render the entire shape. Same thing with the sword, and that's just a great tip, and it will it's a good little bit of discipline too, to kind of and let's face it, that little bit extra time I think goes a long way if it means that the area that is visible is in proportion and not all funky looking. So good little tip. Feel free to take that one. That one's for free. Actually, all of this is for free now that I think about it. So you can see here, I pulled way out so you can kind of see the what do we call it? The flats. Just literally just rendering all the, what I like to refer to as kind of like the coloring book stage. I just kind of, I use the line as a guide, and then literally just fill in those areas. In Procreate, you can turn your line art to what they call a reference layer, which will allow you to put a layer underneath and apply color by just like simply grabbing the little circle color icon in the upper right hand corner of the interface, and select the color and drag it right into open spaces within the line art on that new layer, and it fills in and it literally fills it in right to the line. It's kind of a cool little trick. I suggest you guys give it a peep. It's a feature that's been in Procreate for a while. I thought it was new, but it's new to me, so I'm excited to be using it. Oftentimes, however, there are times where I just just render an area in color. And I definitely do that when it comes to the shading stage. Shading stage is, again, on its own layer on top of the the flats. As a matter of fact, this whole section of the Night's King is it's its own section, its own line art, its own flat color, and its own highlight and shadow layer. That way, if I needed to move him around as a group, I can in Procreate group those together. So if I wanted to shift him and move him up and down, another good reason to render him in complete full head and that full section of body and arm and cord from the clippers is because if I need to shift and move him around, I don't have to re-render anything. I've got flexibility, and trust me, flexibility is key. Same thing with the sword. I mean, it's I think I ultimately decided to I decided to tuck the sword behind the throne, but I rendered the whole thing in case I want to have it in the foreground. And Jon Snow was easy to render the whole thing because he is in the foreground. He's the foremost character, so it was easy to render him in completion. And so I'm moving on to the shadow end stage here. Same process, literally. He's got his own line art. He's got his own fill, his own sort of like flat color layer. And then he also has his own shadow and highlight layer. It's the way I do it. I imagine it's the way most people do when they render in this sort of cartoony style. It's something I've said repeatedly. It's selecting the light source, which generally is from above. In this case, I think the light is reflecting from a different direction. It is coming from the left for the foreground characters, but I think it's sort of reflected back up at the Night's King. So if you notice, the lighting is sort of coming from, he's sort of lit from below. Just a style choice, just a render choice. I think I was probably thinking that if his lightest portion of him, his face, is right there, I think it would look best. So finishing touches, guys. Last little stage there, I chose to put a little logo in. We were kind of toying with the idea of doing like our own sort of, our own t-shirts, t-shirt line. We may still down the road, but that's the point of it. That's why I call this a t-shirt design, because ultimately I think this would be great on a t-shirt. And if you agree, let me know, please. Feel free to drop comments right here on YouTube. Go to my Facebook page, punch in sketchyGOichie to find it. And while you're punching in sketchyGOichie, live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. Peace.